Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 4, not part 5, part 4. Sorry about that if I confused you. I was confused myself on the number of videos I was doing of this series. It's going to be should be the last series, or the last video of this series for today. Basically Wednesday, March 27th, 2013. I'm Darko. My website is ggnonline.com, and on YouTube my channels are ddarko2012 and ddarko2013. Alright, so I'm ready to go here to cover the economy, transatlantic trade. We need a new structure for the global system, says Robert Zoellick, a former IMF guy, or head. The planned transatlantic free trade agreement between Europe and the U.S. must be sensitive to agricultural concerns. Oh, so he cares. He wants to make sure this is a good trade. Yeah, former World Bank, that's right. Robert Zoellick said in Spiegel. Wants to make sure it's a good treaty that takes your sovereignty, right? He cares. So it says here in Spiegel, but we're seeing populist sentiments in Germany, the formation of anti-Europe party being one of the more visible examples. It's also happening with the Independence Party. In Britain, many German citizens are simply fed up with having to bail out other European Union member states. And I'm not glorifying the guy, I'm just saying that I'm pretty sure there was a quote by Hitler that said that if Germany loses the war, that they would become the cash cow for Europe. And that's exactly what they have. You can go in there and check this out. I'll post a link. EU-US joint statement on enhancing transatlantic cooperation in the area of justice, freedom, and security. So whether the European Union actually survives or not, or even the U.S. corporation survives or not, once they have this treaty up and running, it will bind the two continents or unions, or because you have the SPP, Security Prosperity Partnership, for the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. So they're just trying to merge all these together, and that will become the big corporation, the big company, or the country. So it says here, you can go ahead and read it through here. It's just nothing but nice, fancy words about how countries are going to lose more sovereignty. EU and the United States of America share common values of democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. We recognize that transitional crime and terrorism pose a threat to these shared values. So we thus seek to deepen transatlantic cooperation, that's integration, political integration, in the pursuit of greater justice, freedom, and security. So this is after the Great Recession that I call the Great Wealth Consolidation and Political Integration Operation of 2008. But it's really before 2008 and after 2008. That's why Zoellick goes in there and says, oh, we're only halfway through the recovery, as he puts it. The recovery is when these bastards, these criminals, get what they want. That's when the recovery will be over. They're the ones carrying out transnational, basically international crime and terrorism, political and economic terrorism, that are ruining people's lives. And of course, they'll come in and save everybody. U.S.-EU trade deal is good for jobs and prosperity. So, oh wow, I'm sure the people in the EU heard that before, right? Kind of like when they proposed about the North American Union, or SPP. It's going to create jobs, right? Initially, it may do that. But 2 years ago, Volkswagen opened a $1 billion manufacturing facility in Tennessee that employs 3,000 Americans and makes 150,000 cars a year for the U.S. market and for export to Canada, Mexico, and South Korea. They said the investment has been transformative, creating jobs and growth not only in Tennessee but also throughout the region. Says it's an experience we can repeat throughout the country if we tear down obstacles to foreign investment and trade. So last week, Obama told Congress of his intention to create the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with Europe. So he's, he created this. Yeah, that was Obama working away in the White House in the dark hours and the wee hours of the night, burning the midnight candle to help Americans have a better standard of living. Completing this historic agreement will strengthen America's future competitiveness and prosperity. It'll just further integrate, like I said, wealth. Consolidate wealth, and it'll put more wealth into fewer hands, and it'll exploit people. That's the barriers. The barriers are exploiting people in that pesky thing called individual sovereignty and national sovereignty. That's the whole point of globalism. That's what the whole point was. I'm preaching to the choir here, I know it. But you have to have a little bit of competition, because pure communism or pure capitalism doesn't really work, whatever you want to call it. So they used to have this kind of hybrid fascism or corporatism. But whatever you want to call it, it's just an East trading bloc and West trading bloc, and we're just seeing how the East bloc and West bloc is basically vying over for these little places in Asia, and Middle East. The U.S. and 27 nations of the European Union will form the world's largest trading area. Combined population of 800 million slaves generates almost half of the world's gross domestic product, which is all thrown in the stock market and basically speculated on. So, Transatlantic Partnership Trade Pact. So, says here that neoliberalism knows no bounds, so perhaps it should not come as a bolt out of the blue that the United States and EU are set to negotiate this thing. So it says here the Obama regime would have its hands full of the ongoing top-secret Trans-Pacific Partnership talks, but it seems that much can be done in the absence of any pesky oversight. It says it might be thought that European Union officials would have their hands full with their series of financial crises, but it appears that this is an irresistible opportunity to safeguard austerity. So this is an interesting concept. This could be one of the biggest things that are going on right now, the Transatlantic Partnership, and they got this crap with North Korea and Kim Jong-un, threatening, and he's doing it because, of course, he's reacting to threats against him and provocations. So that's legit. But they do that to get him saber rattling, and then, of course, you have the whole thing in Cyprus. It's all a distraction of what's actually happening, because those things may not necessarily go forward, but this will, and it'll have a long-lasting impact. The project is sponsored by the usual corporate organizations. The Transatlantic Trade Agreement evaded all radar until President Obama's announcement in his State of the Union address, but had been in the works for more than a year. Trans-Pacific Partnership will undermine democracy and empower transnational corporations from the 27th of March from Truth Out. So it goes on here and it says that on critical issues, this TPP being negotiated in secret by the Obama administration will undermine democracy in the U.S. around the world and further empower transnational corporations. It will circumvent protections for healthcare, wages, labor rights, those pesky things, those barriers, as they say, consumers' rights and the environment, and decrease regulation of big finance and risky investment practices. It says it'll be very unpopular with the American people, who most aren't even aware of it. Once they are aware of it, they can be approved. Can it be approved as if the Obama regime avoids the democratic process by using an authority known as fast track, which limits the constitutional checks and balances of Congress? It says if it is approved, the sovereignty of the U.S. and other member states will be dissipated by the trade tribunals that favor corporate power and force national laws to be subservient to corporate interests. Free trade and unrestricted capital flow, how billionaires get rich and destroy the rest of us. So you can go in there and check it out, and it basically goes in there and gives a pretty good little breakdown, but I'm going to keep moving for time's sake. South Korea, China, and Japan get serious about free trade, so they like using that word free trade. Fair trade? No, free trade. The three Asian nations, South Korea, China, and Japan, have started a first round of preliminary negotiations on creating a joint free trade zone. Should it ever come about, it might also help ease political tensions. Well, that's what these trade things are all about, right? They're all about political, basically political policies, changing politics. So, it's like in order to be part of this trading bloc or this treaty, you're going to have to curb your population. So you're going to have to bring those numbers down in order to trade. EU and Japan agreed to launch free trade talks. The EU and Japan have decided to start negotiations toward a free trade agreement next month. The aim is to create an additional 1% growth to improve the sluggish economy. That's basically after they've been looted. Mexico will ask to join the U.S.-EU Transatlantic Trade Agreement. You can go and check out Alan Watt's website. He's gone through all of this, did a nice little broadcast of it. But here on Global Research in Canada, they call it economic integration towards a North America-EU Transatlantic Free Trade Zone. Then you have this, a final push for a Canada-EU CETA and the coming NAFTA-EU trade zone. So you like all these little acronyms. But what is the Canada-EU CETA? CETA is basically Canada and the European Union on a comprehensive economic and trade agreement. I covered in the first video, BRICS leaders agree on joint development bank. The BRICS group of emerging economies has hammered out a deal to establish an infrastructure bank that will rival the Western-dominated World Bank. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa met on Wednesday. They agreed to $50 billion to establish the development bank that is hoped to give the top emerging economies greater influence on the world stage. This article won't come out right, but it's basically saying Goldman Sachs says, sorry, United States manufacturing isn't coming back. France is one of the countries that's saying they're against rushing into the U.S.-Europe Free Trade Pact. So they said, slow down, we will all win, provided we don't rush. Why is that? Well, let's see here. French unemployment rate at 16-year high. That's right. Says for the 22nd month running, a record high unemployment. Millions of UK families cut food to pay for homes, so they're freezing and they're cutting food to pay for their homes. So you know who's benefiting from this, right? The usury system, the lenders. Over 5 million families with children across Britain have been forced to cut back on food last year. That's already inflated last year in order to meet their rent or mortgage costs. 40% had scaled back on their food shopping in 2012 to pay for housing costs, equating to 5.5 million families. And they're talking about doing all these jumping through hoops and that and creating these trade agreements to keep austerity going. Europeans' health worsened due to austerity measures. Would that be good for the population, right? Use economic warfare for basically population or eugenics warfare. Harsh austerity measures imposed by the European governments had led to a surge in suicide rates and the outbreak of diseases not normally seen in Europe. The robot reality, service jobs are next to go. It says here if you meet Baxter, the latest humanoid robot from Rethink Robotics, you should get comfortable with them because you'll likely be seeing more of them soon. Remember I was talking about automation and stuff and eventually go to service jobs, and here we go, right? Rethink Robotics released Baxter last fall and received an overwhelming response from the manufacturing industry, selling out the production capacity through April. He's cheap to buy, only $22,000, easy to train, and can safely work side by side with humans. Just what factories need to make their assembly lines more efficient. Again, efficient, you have to think about that. It's all about the profit margin and integrating, right? Because this is how the system has to work. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme, but that's the way it works. And it always has to grow. There always has to be growth because there's always exploitation. And because the workers themselves don't have any control over production, they have nothing invested. 92% of the stock market is owned by these wealthy elites. So you know, they dictate things. And yes, to replace costly human workers. So they need to make their assembly lines more efficient. And yes, to replace costly human workers. So. I remember uncovering an article about robots on the farm. So replace farmers too. You know, those Mexicans that usually do the work that Americans don't want. Because if they did try to do it, they would go to jail, right? The employers and the workers hiring American citizens to get paid below minimum wage, they would get fired. European stock markets plunge on Cyprus deal. European stock markets have plunged after the Cyprus struck a 10 billion euro deep bailout deal to save the country from bankruptcy, right? So it sounds like a good thing. It was all about gas reserves. I told you about that, about the East and Gazprom, Russia, and Europe basically vying over for gas rights, natural gas rights. U.S. stocks fall on broad concern about Europe. So I remember hearing on the radio today about how, the U.S. has a ball and chain. They want to grow and they want to get better and recover, but Europe's dragging them down. And it just pisses me off because this is like, well, are there Polish and Germans working in the United States? I mean, what the do they have to do with us? What do they have to do with our GDP? You know, but this is how they have it now. They have it like this. We're all interconnected, and now they want to take it to the next level with this TPP. Like I said in the other videos, this is where it's going, like singularity and everything. This is where it's going. And if you talk to these people, they're very sharp dressed, they speak well, and they'll give you a nice condescending smirk saying, you know what, you people need to just go away. You're living in the past. You know, this is going to come whether you like it or not. And that's why a lot of people just got on board with it and go with it, politicians and that. EU to bank depositors in other member states, you could be next. Savings accounts in Spain, Italy, and other European countries will be raided if needed to preserve Europe's single currency by propping up failing banks. Maybe they learned from the United States, which, if I remember, helped bail out foreign banks in Europe as part of the bailout. Cyprus prepares money controls before banks reopen. They're preparing limits on how much money depositors can take out of their accounts a day before the banks are set to reopen. Amid protests, Cyprus bank chairman resigns. Russia to ban cash transactions over $10,000. The government plans to slash the amount of cash in domestic trade. Zero Hedge is saying the Russians have already quietly withdrawn all of their cash from Cyprus. Russia and South Africa seek to create an OPEC-style platinum bloc. As the U.S., quote, pulls out, even though they aren't, Afghans ready to exploit country's massive mineral wealth. The Afghans or the internationalists? Thank you.